What up, gamers? I'm Aaron, and today I'm gonna try not to overreact to the Midnight Alpha changes. They're f***ing me in the Okay, but for real, if you've been spending any time on the internet since the Midnight Alpha was revealed, well, then you've seen that the reaction has been a bit mixed, to say the least. So I want to kind of cut through the unnecessary hating that's going on one side, and the irrational glazing that's going on the other hand. Because really, when you get right down to it, some of this shit is really cool, and some of this stuff is undeniably real shit. Now, did I get the alpha? Hell no. In the eyes of Blizzard, I'm a nobody. Luckily, their decisions have saved our YouTube feeds from some other really shit videos, but they must not have gotten the memo that the greatest WoW player of all time, Razzun, or Aaron, or Kitchen Commander, or whatever the hell he's going by these days, is actually a YouTuber now. So, I guess I'll just see you guys in the Last Titan. Peace. So anyways, the Midnight Alpha changes have boiled down to two real controversial decisions. That is, assuming you don't count the transmog drama, which might make a third. But we're gonna talk about the smaller shit first, and that's come down to A, they are pruning the absolute fuck out of every class in the game, and B, add-ons are getting decimated. Which one should we start with? Well, okay, let's start with the class pruning. Now, you've got a ton of people who are really celebrating this change, and it's not really too hard to see why. Because sometimes you open a guide and you've got 6 paragraphs describing when it's time to cast Crusader Strike. But on the other hand, you've got a lot of people who really resonate with the combat of modern World of Warcraft, and it's probably why they choose to play retail over, Classic, which already has that much more pruned experience. Now, unsurprisingly, the truth of whether this is a great change or the worst change of all time is sort of somewhere in the middle. Now, I am undeniably coming at these changes from a point of frustration, which I'll explain in a minute, but we have to give some credit here to the more casual people, because some of these classes have bloated beyond any sort of rational decision making. My example here will be tank specializations. In Shadowlands, I loved Brewmaster Monk. It was so much fun. The rotation was tight, and it felt great. And I'm not trying to make a joke about your mother, I'm just saying that at the time, it was perfect. But Dragonflight came along, and they wanted to really separate, the spec and the class, or sort of bring them together, I guess is more apt. They wanted to make it so you weren't just a Brewmaster, you were a Brewmaster Monk. And that meant throwing in a bunch of random-ass monk abilities that didn't flow with the spec at all. The number one example of this at the time was Rising Sunkick. I mean, why would Brewmaster want Rising Sunkick? It didn't synergize with their kit in any way, it didn't have a single cool interaction, it just did a lot of damage. So you felt obligated to kind of throw this stick in the wheel of your bike every 5 to 6 seconds by pressing this useless button that looks good on the meters. Imagine if you wanted to listen to your favorite song and every 10 to 12 notes they just played a full slide whistle sound effect because it supposedly made it better. Well, this has happened since Dragonflight with basically every tank spec, and even some of the DPS ones too. You pick up this ability, or even like 6 abilities that do absolutely nothing but hit really hard, and by the end of the day, you've collected 12 new keybinds that do nothing but make your spec feel worse. So with that all being said, I am in defense of some pruning. I feel like going back to a Shadowlands or 2020 level is a very comfortable place. You've got a lot of depth, but it's also very clean, very refined. You don't just have a bunch of random filler buttons. But that being said, I also have to kind of come around and side with the complainers, because they didn't just stop at pruning some of these classes to 2020, they took some of them back to 2005. We're gonna use my beautiful baby as an example, Fire Mage. Now, Fire Mage has been, for like 10 years now, the example of, play this class if you want something with a lot of depth that's hard to master, that you can show off your skill on. There are probably people playing Mage today that picked it up almost a decade ago because they liked the high skill floor. So for those people, seeing these new talent changes for Fire Mage is basically the equivalent of being told by the doctor they're gonna have to amputate your legs. So, take a look at this here. Okay, This is my kill of Soul Hunters from about a month ago. It's not perfect, but it was at least like top 25 parses at the time. And when you look at this, you can see how some pruning would be just fine here. I mean, there's all kinds of little things that we could absolutely do with that. See, this little buff here is called Feel the Burn. I won't get into it, I'll just say that you could probably cut this and have, no problem. Here during combustion, there's times when I'm spending my fire blasts while I already have a hot streak, which might seem int, but it's actually still the right thing to do at high haste for Unleashed Inferno cooldown reduction. And here, whether or not I shifting power after my combustion ends is a completely personal stylistic choice, and you could argue both sides, and whether you're right or wrong on shifting powering here is entirely dependent on what procs you're gonna get 20, 30 seconds down the line. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's a lot going on here, and you could absolutely dumb this shit down without turning it into, something that actually removes depth from the game. But what did they decide to do instead? Well, they fucking decimated the entire spec. In Midnight it has 3 buttons, and I mean 3! And if that wasn't bad enough, Combustion no longer gets cooldown reduction from your critical strike effects. So now, the absolute worst part of Fire Mage, the spamming Fireball for 10 to 30 seconds, now lasts upwards of 70 seconds. And it now also removes that hope you get to hold on to. At the start of an expansion, when your gear is shit, you say, okay, this feels awful, but when I get more haste, it's gonna feel great and I'm gonna be combusting all the time. Now that's gone. You will be spamming Fireball today, in 6 months next year, in 6 months after that, you will still be spamming Fireball. And oh my god, imagine how awful this is gonna feel in Raid. If you have Combustion on a fixed minute 30 cooldown, and a boss comes around that does its mechanic every minute where you want to have damage, what the fuck do you do? I guess the answer is you just play a different spec, or accept that you're going to be holding your cooldowns for 30 seconds to an entire minute for no reason other than the fact that they felt like this was a good idea. Now look, I'm not going to act like the CDR aspect of Fire Mage is always a good time. There have been days where I'm just having to fuck with my gear all the time to make sure I get combustion at the exact right moment. Sometimes you find yourself 6 feet up Mugsy's rectum, so your Phoenix Flames hits a quarter second faster and you get your combustion sooner, and you just kind of wonder, what the fuck did I do with my life to get here? But, removing this, I don't see how it makes it better. And imagine this shit in Mythic Plus. I mean, Fire Mage will have to be so absurdly broken in its combustion, like I'm talking BFA levels of broken Fire Mage, because without that, it won't even come close to viability. You are just going to be hard casting Flame Strike for a minute and 15 seconds every time you pop cooldowns. That's terrible. That is awful. If you did that today, you wouldn't even beat the tank. But anyway, okay, I'm gonna stop complaining about Fire Mage. And here's why. It's not going live like this. Maybe I'm hitting the hopium too hard. But I believe in Blizzard to realize that this spec specifically is kind of a huge overreaction. And the reason for that is when you look at the specs that just got, tightened up a little bit and didn't get pruned, it looks great. I mean, the best example as of right now is Beast Mastery Hunter. This spec is already built like a teething toy. They know their audience, and because they know it's already quite simple, you can tell they didn't really try to cut too much out. They rather just streamlined it. And the end result is something that not only really enhances the class identity through the hero talents, but also they got a lot of gameplay changes to make their talents feel a lot more crisp. If every rework was like this, and bringing the spec back to a level that would feel good 5 years ago, then we're definitely cooking. So I have some faith that we will be able to kind of split the middle rather painlessly here. I'm hoping. We just need to make sure the specs that got completely destroyed get brought back a little bit. But that's just one of the big issues. The other one that has also kind of dominated the conversation is the removal of add-ons. Now, I'm going to try to keep this one a little bit brief, because I think if you're a die-hard add-on hater, there's no way I'm going to convince you. And if you don't trust, Blizzard to do this smoothly, it's very unlikely Blizzard will convince you either. The long and short of this is that add-ons are pretty much completely killed in Midnight. And that isn't inherently a bad thing. I mean, I personally was tired of updating my weakauras every single night this tier. But the thing that's quite uncomfortable about this situation is that we were sort of led to believe this would be more of a long-term project. Well, it looks like they're kind of just ripping the band-aid off come midnight. There's a lot of reasons not to trust Blizzard here. I mean, you could look at some of their other just trust me decisions in the past. Things like target capping, conduit energy, azurite armor. All of these were already kind of, noted as being terrible before release, but we got the just trust me and it ended up being terrible as well. But the removal of add-ons probably won't fuck things up that bad. But it does leave a giant question, and that is, why are we ripping off this band-aid in the first place? It would have been very possible to just make no add-on friendly bosses and then remove add-ons, rather than kind of just trying to, do both at the same time and risk fucking shit up big time. Like, let's think about this for a second. In this tier, they made Fractilis. This is like the poster boy of a weakaura boss. Why did they make this? Nexus King and Dimensius both show that you can do great, challenging bosses with very minimal weakaura requirements. So it makes you wonder if somebody had a developer at gunpoint and said, you must make weakaura cancer before they threw in Fractilis. I see so many silly takes saying, oh, weakauras ruined Fractilis. But that is so cope, it's absurd. I mean, imagine this fight without add-ons. It still fucking sucks. There is no clear indicator if you're placing walls or if you're breaking them. And imagine 5 raiders queuing up their mic at the exact same time, trying to figure out where they're going. The fight is quite frankly dog shit. And that's okay because there's shitty bosses every raid tier. But the point I'm trying to get at is, why did we not just try not making Fractilis and then removing add-ons? Now, this change is also going to inevitably come at the cost of losing a lot of very valuable tools. And convincing Blizzard that we need these tools is going to be a massive uphill battle. If we win, we'll probably still have to wait upwards of a year for them to actually implement it. An example of one of those tools might be something like seeing your teammates' cooldowns. Now, seeing your teammates' cooldowns is actually more important in Midnight, because, if you take like a Fire Mage today, you don't need to track combustion because Fire Mage is always combusting. But in Midnight, with no CDR, if you want to do a big pull, you need to know if your mage is a human being this pull, or if he's going to be competing with the healer before you make any rash decisions. Now, another one is seeing which teammate is targeted by spells by looking at their unit frame, not the, enemy cast bar. And, again, shout out Blizzard, because they did put the target of spells on their default nameplates, which is a huge step up. But when you're fighting 10 to 15 mobs, this is really hard to track. It's very important to be able to see on your friend's health bar that, he's targeted by 3 firebolts and is about to die instantaneously. So I guess as a whole, where we're landing on this is, can it be good? Sure. I mean, we absolutely could walk away from this way better off than when we started. But it's also got some very high chances of serious growing pains, and that begs the question of why we're rushing it. I would much rather we took our time with this removal, rather than, walking head first into this tripwire. I guess that'd be foot first, but you get the point. So anyway, overall, I am hopeful that they can take this in a good direction. I'm sure that they learned from something like Shadowlands, and they're not going to intentionally nuclear blast their video game again. So anyway, that's what's going on in the Midnight Alpha. This will be iterated on quite a bit over the coming weeks, so hopefully we'll have some movement in the positive direction. And if you have any interest in helping me achieve my lifelong dream of buying a McChicken with YouTube money, then I would really appreciate it if you could check out some of my other content or consider joining me as a subscriber. I appreciate it so much. My name is Aaron. Thanks for your time. Peace. This spec is already built like a teething toy.